All right, hey everybody. Welcome back for our final lecture in the Gospel of Mark. We've been working through one chapter at a time. Today we will end with Mark chapter 5. Again, the point of this is not to, give you a running commentary on Mark and teach you everything that there is to know about Mark. Not that I could do that. Um, but trying to work through the text and point out things that would be helpful as we think about thinking about the text in terms of history, theology, literature, as we read behind the text historically, in the text, maybe narratively, how it's put together, and then in front of the text in terms of what the text does with the reader, both us as the reader and those who have come before us. So today we're finally going to get to that Gerasene demoniac story. That's the picture you see on your screen right now. You can see Jesus with the sort of halo over his head and the formerly demon-possessed man kneeling before Jesus, and then those pigs in the water. So let's go ahead and jump in. Once again, if you've got a Bible, go ahead and open up to Mark chapter 5, and we'll just cover it together. Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5 is broken up into two big parts. We've got 5, 1 through 20. This is the story of the Gerasene demoniac. And then 5 verses 21 to 43. This is the story of Jairus and his daughter. And then in the middle of that, we get this hemorrhaging woman. Importantly, though, important for us to note here, the chapter division between 4 and 5, all the chapter divisions, are later additions. The versification and chapter is later addition. Mark did not, write, now I'm starting chapter 5. And sometimes they're sort of arbitrary. And here's what I mean by that. If you were to preach through the Gospel of Mark, which I'm currently doing right now, and so I'm thinking about how to break up the text for sermonizing it. I think the right move or a good idea is to preach the end of chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. We saw last week the stilling of the storm from Jesus. And also to preach 5, 1 through 20 in the same text. I think these stories are meant to be read together. So one of our principles of interpreting the Gospels, it does not just matter what an author says, but it matters how an author says it and where an author says it. These stories are not placed in chronological order. Think about, chapter 4, for example, is just a bunch of parables put together into one section, at least for the first majority of the chapter. There is a broad chronology in the Gospel of Mark, but it's not rigidly chronological. There is topical grouping going on. Think about Luke chapter 15, those three famous parables, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost sheep, and then the parable of the prodigal son, or maybe call it the parable of the two brothers. These three are all communicating something similar. It's arguing from lesser to greater, right? The climaxing in the prodigal son. Um, and, if you're preaching through Luke, you could do each one of those week after week, but they're essentially making the same point in the Gospel of Luke. Um, you could either preach them together or you could preach the climactic one. But it would be a good take, I think, to preach them together because they're grouped together on purpose to make the same point. I think something is true here as well with this stilling of the storm at the end of chapter 4 and the Gerasene demoniac in chapter 5. And we'll come back to that in just a second. But let's work through our text. So getting off the boat at the beginning of chapter 5, This is the longest healing story in all of the Gospels, and in Mark at least. It's the longest exorcism. It is an absurd amount of detail. Just listen to this. Um, Verse 2, when he got out from the boat immediately, a man with an unclean spirit met him coming out of the tombs, who had his dwelling place among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him with chains any longer. Verse 4, because many times with hand chains and foot chains he had been bound. And they were torn apart by him. The foot chain, the hand chains were torn apart by him, and the foot chains were shattered. And no one was strong enough to control him. And all the time, all night and every day, uh, he was in the tombs and in the mountains, crying out and cutting himself with stones. I mean, that is an unprecedentedly long description. I mean, we get something close in Mark chapter 9 with that story of the demon-possessed boy. Um, but this is extremely detailed. We do not get this kind of thing in the Gospels. Mark is really slowing down what he's doing here. And it's quite a frightening scene that Jesus pulls up on, isn't it? Um, this man whom no one was strong enough to control. He's got different chains on him. Um, no longer is he able to be bound by chains. That implies that at one point, even in his possessed state, he was able to be bound, but the strength, the power, the ferocity is growing, and he is no longer able to be bound by chains. Um, at the end of verse 3, no one was able to bind him. And at the end of verse 4, no one was strong enough to control him. Those two statements are very important. We'll take them one at a time. At the end of chapter 3, no one was able to bind him. Now, what's this deal of binding going on? I mean, yes, we were thinking contextually in the passage um, about this guy being bound with hand and foot chains. They are like, in the historical scene, they matter. But think about on a literary level in the Gospel of Mark, reading in the text, not just behind the text. In the text, where have we seen the theme of binding already? Think back. It is in chapter 3 with the parable of the strong man during the Beelzebul controversy, when Jesus is accused of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, the prince of the demons. And he tells this story about this parable that this doesn't make any sense, Jesus says. Satan has a kingdom. How is it going to stand if Satan casts out Satan? Then he ends by saying, and no one can go into the house of the strong man unless he first binds the strong man. Same word in Greek and in English, deo. Uh, no one can go into the house and plunder the possessions of the strong man unless he binds him first, and then he can go in and take his possessions. And on this sort of cosmic narrative level in the story, that is clearly talking about Jesus and Satan. Satan is the strong man, and Jesus, this is programmatic of his entire work in the Gospel of Mark. Something about what he's doing is binding Satan. Now, this binding motif, if you go read First Enoch, or Jubilees, this is a way that people could talk about controlling demons, or the Testament of Solomon, or the Book of Tobit. Figures, either angels or exorcists empowered by God, they can bind demons in order to control them. But here, within the Gospel of Mark, Mark is setting up tension in this story. No one was able to bind him. Nobody could do it. Okay. Well, that sort of gives us the question: Is Jesus going to be able to bind the man? Same thing at the end of verse 4, this other statement. No one was strong enough, ischuen, to control him. Now, this brings up another motif, right? Because Satan, remember in chapter 3, Beelzebul, the strong man is how he's described. But this goes back even farther. Think about how John the Baptist describes Jesus in Mark 1:8. The stronger one, ha iskurateras, the stronger one is coming after me, behind me, and I'm not worthy to bend down and untie his shoes. Jesus, the first identification of Jesus from the lips of a person is John the Baptist calling him the stronger one who is to come. Well, Satan is the strong one. Jesus is the stronger one. And here, no one is strong enough to control this man with the unclean spirit that meets Jesus on the shore. So you've got nobody could bind Jesus. Okay, Jesus is on a binding mission. Nobody was strong enough to control this man. Okay, well, Jesus is the stronger one. Mark is not unclear here. No one has been able to do these things. He's building the narrative tension. We're supposed to be asking, this excessively fierce demoniac, will Jesus be able to bind him? Will he be strong enough to control him? Look at verse 6. When he saw Jesus, this man, he ran from far away and he prostrated himself before him. And he cried out in a great voice, Tie mi que si, what is it to you and to me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? I adjure you by God, do not torment me. For Jesus had said, Unclean spirit, come out from the man. And he asked him, What is your name? And the man said to Jesus, My name is Legion, for we are many. Now, here we find out there is not just one demon in this man. There is a legion of demons in the man. Now, legion is a Roman military term. You've probably heard this before. Thousands of soldiers in a legion. We'll see that the pigs, there are 2,000 pigs that go down the cliff. And so here, Mark is still setting up the tension. Thousands of demons, thousands of unclean spirits in this man. They are ferocious. They are fierce. And there's one Jesus. What's going to happen? Nobody's been strong enough to even tie this guy down to keep him from cutting himself with rocks. My name is Legion, for we are many. And verse 10, he, this being the unclean spirit, was begging him excessively in order that Jesus should not send them out of the region. Verse 11, now there was, towards the mountain, there was a herd of pigs, a great herd of pigs, feeding. And they begged Jesus, saying, Send us into the pigs in order that we should enter into them. So Jesus permitted them. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they drowned in the water. Now, think about it on a narrative level, again, in the text. Jesus has just come from this end of chapter 4, stilling the storm, calming the waves, this great display of power like only Yahweh is supposed to be able to show. Psalm 77. The one who tramples on the waves is the Lord. Here, Jesus sends the pigs, the demon, into the pigs, and the pigs run down the bank, and they drown in the sea. There's a great article by, his first name is Nathan, and his last name starts with a V. I'm going to get his name wrong if I say it, but it just came out this past year. That points out here Pigs, and if any of you grew up on a farm and raised pigs, you send me an email and tell me if this is true. But apparently, pigs are naturally very good swimmers. Pigs are strong swimmers. They were back in the ancient world, and they are today. Um, that's sort of surprising to me, but apparently it's true. And people in the ancient world would have known this. And so for the pigs to run down the bank and drown in the sea is really surprising because it's not as if they got down there and couldn't swim. Pigs swim really, really well. But these pigs go into the sea and drown. Here again, Jesus at the end of chapter 4 has just shown his power over the waters. I think, along with this Nathan guy who wrote the article, here again, it is not simply that the pigs ran down into the sea. Jesus used the sea to swallow up the pigs. They drowned because Jesus was controlling the waves. These capable swimmers could not swim. Jesus destroyed these pigs in the water and the demons in the pigs. I mean, think about, Exodus um, 15 with the crossing of the Red Sea. Yahweh causes the sort of walls of water to crash back down in on Pharaoh's chariots. He um, dominates the waters in order that the children of Israel could pass through in one scene. And in the very next scene, he uses that same water to destroy their enemies. I think you could probably, on a narrative level, map that onto this. It's difficult to prove that Mark is following that as a convention, but something similar at least is happening, right? The pigs die in the water because of Jesus. They don't just freak out and drown out of exasperation or something. Jesus is here again in control of the waters, destroying this legion of demons. So, if you were going to preach through the Gospel of Mark, and as I'm looking forward in a few months, I'm thinking about this. When I get to the end of chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5, it's a long stretch. This is a long miracle story, and you've got a pretty good stilling of the storm before it. I think it's worth it to preach all of that at the same time, though, because Mark puts those together very intentionally. Jesus is in control of the waters in chapter 4, and he's in control of the waters in chapter 5. The same way he delivers his people through the waters in chapter 4, he uses the same water to destroy their enemies in chapter 5. This is masterful work on Mark's part, literarily. Just brilliant. Skip ahead to verse 18. The people who had been feeding the sheep, they get really freaked out and they beg Jesus to leave. 18. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by the demon was begging him in order that he should be with him. And Jesus did not allow it, but he said to him, "Go into your house to your family and proclaim to them, announce to them that which the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And the man went away and began to preach, to proclaim in the Decapolis that which Jesus had done for him, and all were amazed. Notice here, everyone is begging Jesus in this passage. The legion of demons begs Jesus that they would not be sent out of the region. The farmers who had been watching the pigs, those who had been keeping them, beg Jesus that he should leave from them. And then the demoniac at the very end of the story, when he's been healed, he begs Jesus not to go. Everyone is begging Jesus in this text. But look how Jesus sets this up at the end. Look how Mark sets this up. Jesus tells the demoniac to go into his family's house. He restores the person into community with his family. Tell them that which the Lord has done for you. Presumably, Kurios, standing in for the divine name, Yahweh. Tell them what Yahweh has done for you. And what does the man tell everyone? He tells them what Jesus has done for him. Right? Who controls the waters in the Old Testament? It's Yahweh. Who controls them here? It's Jesus. So is it Yahweh who worked for the man, or is it Jesus? And the answer is yes. Jesus is Yahweh. The creeds that we have in our history of the church, the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, the Athanasian Creed, these are good at reading the New Testament. These are not impositions on the text that elevate Jesus to a level that the New Testament never takes him. They are reading the text well. Mark does not have a low Christology of a mere human Jesus who could not ascend to the divine identity. Mark, he depicts Jesus, remember in chapter 1, the voice crying out in the wilderness from Isaiah says, prepare the way of the Lord. In Isaiah 40, that's prepare Yahweh's way. That is Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. And there's no way around that. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the back half of the chapter. Here we get a storytelling technique from Mark that we haven't gotten to observe much so far. Here we observe something called intercalation. Intercalation. We saw it very briefly, sort of a small scale form of it in Mark chapter 1, verses 20 to 28. That exorcism in the Capernaum synagogue. Jesus had been teaching them. Everyone is amazed at his teaching, and then there's an exorcism that takes place, and then the story ends. People are amazed at his teaching. And so you kind of get this teaching thing on the perimeter, and on the inside, you get an exorcism story. Similarly, later in Mark chapter 13, Jesus will curse the fig tree, and he'll go and do some other stuff, and then the next day, the disciples will see it withered. Take Matthew's account, for example, though. Jesus just curses the fig tree, and immediately it shrivels up. It's not like the next day. Here we get Jairus comes to Jesus and asks him to come and save his daughter. Jesus agrees and starts going with him. And then the story gets interrupted, and this woman who is hemorrhaging. She's been flowing with blood for 12 years. She interrupts the story. We have this episode, and then it resumes. It goes back to Jairus. Jesus gets to the funeral and interrupts it. And the idea behind intercalation in Mark's gospel is that you get an A-B-A structure for the stories. And it's not just that this is how it chronologically happened. This is a storytelling technique. And the point here is that the two stories are mutually interpretive. We understand both of them in light of the other. So in Mark chapter 1, for example, when it's Jesus teaching, exorcism, teaching, that is a set of stories about Jesus's authority. Is it about Jesus's authority to teach? Because remember, it starts, they say, he was teaching them as one having authority and not like their scribes. And then Jesus shows this profound display of authority over the unclean spirit. And the people say, they respond at the end of the story, what is this? A new teaching with authority. And Jesus teaches with an authority higher than that of their scribes. And then he shows his authority over demons. He commands the unclean spirit, and they obey him. So is that a story about Jesus's authority in his teaching and his interpretation of the law? Or is it a story about his authority over demons? Once again, the answer is yes. It is a sandwich story. It is an intercalation. The fun name for this is Markan sandwiches. And we'll see this here with Jairus and the hemorrhaging woman. All right, let's look at the text. 21. Now, as Jesus was crossing over in a boat again to the other side, a great crowd gathered upon him, and he was by the sea. And one of the synagogue rulers came. His name was Jairus. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and he begged him. Here's another person begging Jesus. He begged him excessively, saying, "My little daughter," eugatrion, this, if you take in Greek, the diminutive ending on the noun. Not just my daughter, my little daughter, my precious daughter. She is about to die. But would you come and lay your hands upon her in order that she should be saved and that she should live?" So Jesus went away with him, and he followed, a great crowd followed him, and they were pressing in on him. And there was a woman with a flow of blood for 12 years. And she had suffered many things from many doctors, and she had spent all of her money. And nothing got better. It actually got worse. But when she heard about Jesus, she went in the crowd, and from behind, she touched his cloak, his garment. For she had said that if I even touch his garment, I will be saved. And immediately the flow of her blood dried up. It stopped. And she knew in her body that she was healed from her disease. And immediately Jesus, recognizing in himself that power had gone out from him, he turned to the crowd and he said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples were saying to him, "Look, Jesus, you see the whole crowd pressing in on you, and you're really saying, 'Who touched me?'" These disciples think Jesus is stupid. And Jesus doesn't even respond. He was looking around to see who had done this. And the woman was afraid and she was trembling. But she knew what she'd happened to herself, and she came and she fell before Jesus, and she told him all the truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed, be healthy from your illness." Intercalation. Now, while he was still speaking, they came from the synagogue ruler saying that your daughter has died. Why are you still bothering the teacher? And Jesus, overhearing the word which was spoken, said to the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, only believe." And he did not allow anyone with him to follow after except for Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They went into the house of the synagogue leader, and they saw disturbance, commotion, and uproar. And the people were crying and they were wailing loudly. When he went in, he said to them, why are you upset, and why do you cry? The child is not dead, she is asleep." And they laughed at him. And he sent them all out of the room, and he took the father of the child and the mother and those with him, and he went in where the child was. And grabbing the child's hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which is translated as Aramaic, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl rose and walked, for she was 12 years old. And everyone was amazed with great amazement. And he commanded them excessively in order that they should not make this known, in order that nobody should know this. And he said for some food to be given to her to eat. Now this is a great storytelling, this sandwich technique. Did you pick up on all of the things that are in common between Jairus's daughter and between the hemorrhaging woman? For one, go ahead and pause the video and read the text and write down as many as you can. similarities in these stories. Jairus on the outside and the hemorrhaging woman on the inside. Pause the video and write down things that you can find. But here's a few. Um, the woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and the girl was 12 years old. Okay. Um, it's the daughter of Jairus, and Jesus addresses this woman as daughter. Daughter, your faith has saved you. Likewise, um, Jairus asks specifically for his daughter to be saved, sozo, hina sothe, in order that she should be saved. Jesus uses the same language of being saved. Your faith has saved you for the woman. Um, People misunderstand Jesus in both of these texts. The disciples think he's stupid for asking who touched him, and the crowds think he's stupid for saying the girl is just asleep. Jesus gets made fun of in this text. Surely there are others as well, other ways these two texts are connected. But they're put in this sort of literary frame in order to be read together, and it's really important that we get that. If you preach either of these texts, you should probably preach both of them because they're interconnected. The last thing I want to point out is this Markan secrecy motif at the end of the chapter. The girl gets up and she'd been dead, and Jesus raised her. And Jesus commanded them, verse 43, that nobody should know about this. Don't tell anybody what happened, this Markan secrecy motif. This is probably the most absurd example of this in the whole book, because a whole bunch of people had been gathered at the house of Jairus, mourning, wailing, weeping the death of this little girl. Everyone in the town knows that she's dead. And Jesus raises her and says, "Hey, make sure nobody knows about this." Like, is she allowed to show her face again? You don't think when she goes to synagogue this upcoming weekend, people are going to have some questions? Um, this is just, it's a wild secrecy injunction that Jesus has here. This is a motif for Mark, not wanting word to get out improperly. Um, but these are beautiful texts in the Gospel of Mark. Chapter 5 might be my favorite chapter in the book. The Gerasene demoniac story is just brilliant. One note on that, if you go read Matthew's version in Matthew chapter 8, he has two Gerasene demoniacs. So I'll let you think about that this week. How does that work? St. Augustine, for his part, he believed that it must be two different stories. That there must have been one time where Jesus heals one demoniac like this, and another time where the story is pretty similar, but there's two of them. There must be two stories. That's one option, I suppose, but again, maybe Matthew is making a literary point by having two men. That'd be worth thinking about. So that's all we're going to have for Mark chapter 5. It's been a lot of fun to be going through this with y'all. I love the Gospel of Mark. The first 5 chapters are explosive. Hopefully, wherever you find yourself in the Gospels, you've picked up on some reading patterns that can be helpful for you. I know when I think back to my time as a student, that just having reading the text modeled for me by a teacher has been really helpful about knowing what kinds of questions to ask, what things to notice and look for. So I hope this can be helpful for you as well. Read the text over and over again. You can't go wrong doing that. You'll notice these little connections throughout the text when you read in the text in particular. We have to read behind the text and in front of the text as well. But don't neglect that in the text. There's nothing like spending time in the text. And hopefully our reading behind and in front of the text help allow us to do that in a more responsible way. So thanks for your participation. I appreciate each of you. Keep up with the reading in Hayes and Pennington, and keep reading the Gospel of Mark over and over again. The Gospels deserve a special place in our reading of Scripture. I hope you understand why a little bit more after this course. So thank you again for your attention. Have a good one.